I suspect there will be still people who are going to trickle in. But nonetheless, I think we have to start because some of you have kind of teaching and obligations at 2. As you know, these lunchtime discussions have tried to identify a number of kind of problems and issues, which I suppose you might call kind of slightly more domestic issues in the symposium, ones in which we think kind of students will have an interest and concern about and would want to raise as issues that the school can kind of think about as it tries to kind of reconfigure its own internal organization and governance, really in the period sort of before the search. I mean, I think it is very important. You know, we can't go on, as it were, burdening incoming chairs with a set of sort of unresolved problems that we take no responsibility for, and then later on we kind of blame the poor incumbent for not doing X or Y. So as far as possible, I think it's important to raise issues and to see whether there is some kind of consensus, whether there is a call for, and whether there is a consensus for some kind of reform of kind of internal school kind of issues. And this morning we're going to turn to the question of assessment and external examining. Now, I don't really need, in any sense, to introduce Peter Carl and John Tuomey, both of whom are kind of well known within the school, both of whom have been extremely generous in the time and concern they've given as examiners, and they have a great deal of experience of examining not only here, but in many other places. I can't think of two people kind of better suited to think about the issues. And I dare say, I'm going to call upon them to speak in a moment, that they will want to kind of think about the issue of the assessment, I mean, how one might think about the assessment of architecture students as they progress through the education. But I think it's also inevitable that the question of whether we have the right kind of organization and relation at the end when it comes to judging and awarding diplomas. They both know how exactly how those things have been configured at the AA, and I think at this point it's very useful for us to seek advice and ask questions of them about that particular moment in the assessment. So, could I call upon the first speaker, John Tuomey, to say something, and then Peter Carl.
I have just a few things that I thought I might say. I have to say I was invited here to participate in the conversation, so I don't want any of you to make a mistake that this is any kind of a lecture. But I do have a few things to say by way of introduction, and then something about the units system here, and then something about examining. First, to introduce myself to this room, I think I'm a voice from the mainstream. That is, I believe in the continuity of culture. I believe that there is something to know and something to learn. That shouldn't sound strange, but maybe it might in this context. I was taken on by Alvin Boyarsky in the mid-80s, almost 20 years ago, as an external examiner in this school, and I was eventually installed as chair of external examiners during Alan Balfour's time here. So you should, if I ask you to think of me as a voice from the mainstream, you might also think of me as kind of late Alvin, pre-Moyson, 10 years after sort of thing. I have been exposed to a number of RIBA visiting boards here in Cambridge and in Dublin where I teach. And I have, on more than one occasion, been told that my standards are suspect and that my methods are subjective. So I'm probably an unreliable witness at this inquiry. I would support the independence of the AA. I actually think the independence of the AA is its only excuse. I'm a friend to the AA, friendly to its ways. I have strong memories of examining portfolios here and meeting people. Over those portfolios, the painstaking process of portfolio revelation. I have memories of seeing the most extraordinary process of portfolio coming out of Raoul Bunschotten's studios. I have memories of seeing process and drawings coming out of Peter Salter's studios, the like of which I had never seen before. I have memories of drawings coming out of Peter Wilson's studios, which stay in my memory still. I have memories of boxes, wrapped boxes, coming out of Villaret's studios, with not much in them, but lots of attitude. I once remember opening the last page of a portfolio in Raoul Bunschotten's unit with Sverre Fenn as my co-examiner, and I was very confused as to what Raoul thought this whole thing was heading towards. And Sverre Fenn leant across me and he said, don't worry what it's heading towards. Have you seen the quality of the paper? I met Peter Carl at the AA, from whom I learned many things. Peter Carl has no limits that I have yet found. One phrase he used, which I often live in my mind, is when we were discussing some unit or other, Peter Carl said that he thought one purpose of the units was to slow the world down. And I just thought that was such an apt way of kind of summarizing what goes on in the units. The units give an opportunity to concentrate to the exclusion of external matters. What is external to the unit's concern is extraneous. And I would include external examining as being external to the unit's concern. So there's something delicate and something unique here. There's a question of what can be taught and what can be learned, because I believe that there are things to know and things to be transferred. But if the task of teaching is to create the conditions, that is, if the task of teaching is to set the culture for things to be discovered, things to know and things to learn need to be discovered if the knowledge and if the learning is to stick. So that sets a particular demand on people who teach, and it sets a particular expectation of each unit and what their policy would be. The transference of knowledge, if there's knowledge to be transferred, takes effort. And the irony is, I think, that what is actually transferred then is the effort. In other words, the example is the inspiration. I think this is the exotic element that the AA seems to offer, and a kind of a window into the mystery at the center of our work. It doesn't seem to me that there's a recipe offered. That is to say, the emphasis is not on the solution, but there's an appetite kind of lived. That is to say, that the question is open. So when you come to examining in this world where each unit claims its unique terms of reference, I suppose you have to think how best to work as an examiner in such a world. And the way I would do it is I would choose not to over-engage with the internal engine, not to tamper with the working of the machine. I don't think I'm alone in that, because I think I was here for maybe nearly 10 years as an examiner, and I've seen a glazed expression in the face of an examiner confronted with generally elaborately articulate tutors going painstakingly through an elaborately articulated portfolio. And I think the expression of dazed and glazed is common in the face of an examiner. But if you choose not to tamper with the internal workings of the engine, rather to look for signs of resilience, and when I was trying to think about it before I came here, about this question of the independence of the units and their claim to be self-contained, I think each independent republic should seek to produce free men, not slaves. And I think sometimes I would have thought there is a problem that not all your citizens are free. So I would apply two tests. One, what have been learned within the terms of the unit's aspirations. That is simply the question of achievement. And I would look that I think that has something to do with integrity, and I think that is findable if you seek it. And then the second thing I would look for as a kind of parallel check is whether anything of any external value has been included in that learning. That is to say that the experience gained is not simply an exercise completed, but that when you take it out of the body of that unit and transfer to maybe another unit, or perhaps even to the actual outside world, whether there's anything that can still make sense to you, the student, within your own head as to what you might have gained. So one day when I was thinking about that, I discovered that I had come across a parable, or maybe just imagined one, which I'll tell you now, which is the parable of the peacock's feather in the Pharaoh's tomb. I don't know if this is true, anyway, it doesn't matter. Imagine an archaeologist opens Pharaoh's tomb and finds the most perfect peacock's feather has been there 3,500 years in all its glory, in all its resplendent gaiety and beauty. And I suppose, and in the still air of the tomb, this thing has been cultivated or has been preserved. And then the archaeologist packs it up and takes it home to the British Museum and unpacks the box to find the feather has disintegrated and has no life outside the airless atmosphere of the Pharaoh's tomb. Sometimes it used to worry me that the atmosphere of units in the AA was a little comparable to the air in the Pharaoh's tomb, and that some of the portfolios of the students might be compared to the peacock's feather that was perfect and resplendent within that containment, but turned to dust when taken out of that context. So, believe it or not, that's what I came here to say. And maybe I'd be interested to participate with you in a discussion as to what, in a place like this, what examining is for. And and what way we might push it on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move directly to Peter.
Well, as ever, John sets the tone and sort of makes life look like it's meaningful. I'm going to show my limits by discussing examining, which is generally regarded, I think, as the least creative aspect of anything to do with a school. There was certainly, under Alvin, examiners were treated with, oh gosh, we've got this day with examiners. And I remember him taking the RIAI board out to the porch, pouring them a glass of nice claret and telling them they're all full of shit, in literally those words. But the examiners, above and beyond what nice things they might say about your work or perhaps contribute to the thinking or something like that, they also support the school, and they're often appealed to say nice things about the school, because everybody thinks examiners are have some idea, they've seen all your dandruff and they still think you're okay, sort of thing. And I think there's probably, as far as you're concerned, there's probably two issues. One, the issue of fairness, and the other, the issue of the effect of examining on the curriculum, or on the program, or on the possibilities of freedom. And this business of how you use your examiners, and how your examiners are both something apart from the school, and as John has very eloquently shown, both committed to the school, but through this understanding, is something probably to think about. You guys, in the area of fairness, you guys are blessed with a pass-fail system. At almost every other school I examine, there is this absolutely inane conversation, 64 or 65, that is just a complete waste of time. And I think the pass-fail honors system is, honest enough to what you could do, and is, it becomes the basis for standards which you collectively establish, and is generous enough for experimentation. And I would urge you to support that. As John indicated, when we examine, we listen to what the studio tutors have to say very carefully, because that is the parameters in which we look at the students. We can't disagree with it, that there's this famous example of Jim Sterling failing Nigel Coates' unit because he just disagreed with it. That's just not morally right. The student was doomed the day they showed up in the unit. So you assess the student, but you might fail the teacher, as it were. That is to say, they become two different discourses. The student did the project well, and yet the project was flawed in some way. Vague teaching, they all caught SARS, the thing simply didn't pan out. And there's an issue of history of units. A new unit gets treated differently than a unit that's been established, where you know what you're dealing with, and the students knew what they were dealing with, and it's an ongoing kind of discourse. In terms of actually looking at the portfolios, you probably think we don't bother with what's on the front of the sheets and just look at the sides to see how thick it is. But actually, we do go through the work, and it's genuinely interesting to see both what the student has done and what the unit's been about. We're under a great pressure of time, and I think the advent of student presentations has been a good thing. Our life is made much, much easier than it is at other schools here, than it is at other schools, by virtue of the internal tables. 2 centuries ago, I was part of those, and they are really hair-raising, for teachers, and it's like a shock at the end of the year. I think you now do it earlier in the year, which is a good idea. But it's one place where the school really tests its disagreements with each other. And I think what goes on in these tables and what comes out of them as a kind of understanding is something that might be more public, or what you get out of it, i.e. they can be used more creatively. And because it's the one place where you aren't just a unit up in a room and students living off in London reading mags, but really where you are testing ideas. And some of the conversations are just hair-raising, what constitutes a standard. And, when we get them, I don't know how many hundreds of students I've examined, and I think I failed maybe 8 total over something like 25 years. By the time they get to us, it's pretty well weaned. And so we generally get the, the stuff that really deserves looking at, and that's great. But I think that those internal tables are potentially much more important than I get the feeling you use them. I mean, I think the advent of the midterm review is a public event is a good thing, but I think this business of how we understand ourselves, I mean, there's a tendency to treat the AA as a self-sufficient reality, and I think that's probably necessary. I mean, I think if you just, you need to concentrate. Anyway, so I think in terms of fairness, I think students are treated fairly. I mean, they're taken, students with difficulties and so on and so forth. All of that absorbs a lot of time. And I think the question is more, with respect to the school, what are the standards? Where are they coming from? Are they coming from poets? Are they coming from the ARB or whatever else? And you probably know that there's this contest between the ARB and the RIBA. And the ARB isn't interested in good buildings. They're interested in how you process students. And they are more worried about the students at the lower end of the scale and the kind of paper trail they've got than they are about the quality of your work. The ARB syllabus is a perfectly anodyne document. I mean, the new thing was all the stuff about management and so on and so forth. But there was nothing prohibiting quite creative work in it. So that the syllabus isn't the issue. The ARB isn't going to tell you how to be a good school. The RIBA, on the other hand, they're now separate visits, and how they relate to each other is an open contest at the moment, is more interested in interesting buildings. Sorry, I should say the ARB submission most recently has been examiners' reports. They're crucial. And one thing you've got to get your examiners to say is that it's of national and international standard. And two, work goes in as on disk. They don't even visit anymore. The RIBA does visit, but as we, in our last visit, they looked at one project, and that was that. That doesn't mean the board is good, but their intentions are good. And that's just an open problem, and it's one of the things that's affecting the discipline at a time when the discipline is really getting hit in universities. I mean, you guys are in a really special condition, and it's something to protect and really take seriously. I mean, the business of being able to concentrate on design is a real luxury in architectural education in England these days. I mean, whether it'll always stay like this, it's certainly that now, and it's something really to take seriously. Okay, if qualification is the low end of the spectrum, that's not the horizon at which we set our standards. We, as John very eloquently described them, I mean, I think we look for depth and richness in with respect to a school that treats itself as experimental or exploratory, which in the AA has generally meant a critique of assumptions, like most of modernism. The two words that go together for all across the whole shift of interests across 25 years has always been experiment on the one hand and rigor on the other, both being highly ambiguous. And it's a bit like software packages that promise you infinite freedom and infinite control. And this business of how you pitch your project involves, what kind of paper it's on. No, it involves, being able to realize what the idea, what the issue is, and that demands a certain amount of cultural awareness, cultural context. What is the nature of the issue, and how to explore it. There's inevitably conversations about analysis versus demonstration. There was a period of time, I remember a project, I think I mentioned it to you before, that took a handprint on a push bar in a door and turned it into an urban plan. This was from about 20 years ago. Where you say, yes, sure, in the larger scheme of things, that's, it's not wrong, but is it right either? And the question of how you spent your time, what you've done. I mean, all AA portfolios are kind of impressive in that sense, or at least the ones we see. But that business of whether what the diversity of there's a tension between what the school is and what the student's trajectory is. And we hardly ever see students. In other schools you do. You get, a kind of spreadsheet with all their academic grades as well as their portfolio grades, and you get a sense of how the school and the student relate to each other. Here you generally see a student's work is part of a unit, and sometimes units are teams, and sometimes units are more diverse in themselves, blah. But as one of the few people who got to read your general studies and technical studies stuff, often the technical studies is built into the units, and that tends to help. I rarely came away with an impression of what a student had done, kind of as a career. If it's essential for the AA not to become, with all of its units, and Mark is saying there's 700 students, that you have really a diversity of units. It doesn't become monolithic. As a small school like Cambridge can't afford to do what you guys do, both literally and metaphorically. The business, does a student go like this, or does a student go for, say, all the computing units, or all the wood butchering units, or what is the nature of a how to go through this place, how the student should make use of it, and what you get out of the examining. I don't know if you get any feedback out of the examining, whether it's just you put it in a kind of slot machine at the end of the day, and it comes out with a black ball or a white ball, pass or fail, and maybe you got honors. One of the things we instituted at Cambridge was feedback, because we realized that and we made the examining public. I mean, the rest of they've now reverted back to the old regime because they couldn't cope with it. But it seemed like the business of examining was one of the times when the issues really got put on the table, and everybody got to say, right, this is what I did. Yes, I could have done something more or less, but it was worth it, and this is what I learned from it. And you get to hear what the examiners say, and you get to say very concretely, I thought he was full of crap. I thought that was actually quite interesting, so on and so forth. It takes a lot of the mystery out of it. I think certainly the time you get to diploma, everybody's almost all operating at the same level. And the capacity to be quite mature about what is being said and why, on the part of both examiners and teachers and students, is, makes the examining something other than simply, can I jump over the high jump bar? It makes it much more cumbersome to do, more people, more voices, more noise, so on and so forth, but possible idea to think about. One of the things that always used to hang around the air was, were we coming from offices, and were we examining you from a professional standpoint? And the experimental school took its definition of experimental as being non-professional. And I think the weak interpretation of that was, projects that were just kind of a fantasy that were, in the famous phrase, actually built, i.e. they could show that, you generate a C-curve and then show by bolting it together it can stand up, and so you've done the job. Whereas the other units, the better units, realize that there's actually quite interesting issues in how things get built, or who builds them, or how long they last, and all the issues that, as a professional you're involved with, and can take those and take the freedom of the school and really make something of them. And that's more what we as examiners expect. We don't expect office fodder. And curiously, it's the people who can think about an issue in depth and have the lateral imagination who are more useful to an office than the character who can shit insulation in Vectorworks. It's being able to realize when you've got to make compromises, how to make them, what is essential and what's not, that the more creative teaching supports. And that's actually an interesting issue in why to have units that look like this. Therefore, in conclusion, from your point of view, it's less about getting away with it and sort of being able to sneak over the high jump bar or teleport yourself on the other side of it, than it is that everybody wants you to do it well. I mean, everybody's more or less on your side. It's less of a test. And you get into larger issues of how people have understood themselves within the school, a kind of the autonomy of the unit versus the coherence of the school, the questioning of assumptions that's naive or is informed, how the school operates as a metabolism, what use people have made of general and technical studies, how clever they've been with, if they've gotten involved with, I don't know, a slum in London have they just treated it as form, or have they really gotten involved with it, or what have they done with it, this kind of thing. Just sort of how well understood the issue was, and then presented and designed, obviously. That is to say, ultimately, there's a question of ethos, and that really is something that the chairman is certainly responsible for, but there's also a collective element to it. There were periods at the AA where you really felt that, as John was suggesting, that it was a bunch of really autonomous units, and that was really great. The more autonomous, the better. And the AA was there to guarantee that autonomy. Rather than the AA was collaborating, there was another side to that was very interesting, where inside the school, people would chop each other's head off. When people like us showed up, everybody was a unified face and loyal, greatest friends, and all working together. And I think that's fair. I think that's, that kind of understanding is what's involved. There will always be a tension between kind of exploiting architecture to find its possibilities, possibly even as a framework for individual genius. But the side that you also expect to see is some sense of that you're in it for the discipline, that there is something to preserve. There is something that for which you've taken responsibility in a world that really doesn't understand architecture very well. Yeah, that's enough, probably.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it would be fair to say that both speakers, in some sense, have kind of indicated that they support the kind of general character of the way in which kind of examination and assessment occurs, like at the AA. There's certainly no support, and I'm not surprised by that, for kind of like moving in the direction, say, of like public sector forms of examination. But just before we turn it over to the floor, there's one issue I'd like to kind of push a little bit about that, because it does seem to me that, however, the one question which has had to be posed in the public sector, and I'm sure we wouldn't want to give the same answer, but it may be a kind of reasonable question, is what exactly are external examiners examining? And I think that question kind of helps to clarify something at the AA. Maybe the easiest way of describing it is to think about the anxieties, not only of students when they meet the external examiners, but of staff. And this also bears on the kinds of conversations which the staff have with the external examiners. It's no secret that kind of many staff are very concerned with the question of which external examiners are going to be looking at them, sort of point one, because there's a view that this will not only kind of materially affect possibly the outcome for the student, but as it were, the external examiner's sense of the success of the unit. And that is a definite part of what you might call the economy of those meetings that happens at the end. And sometimes I wonder whether there isn't a certain kind of lack of clarity. I was thinking of a way of trying to sort of, to take an extreme case. If you have Peter Wilson commenting on Pascal's unit, and we have, had examples of this kind of thing before, you can have the question, so where's the building? Now, there never was going to be a building, because, as it were, that was not part of the program, right? Now, it does seem to me that in some sense, the program of the unit has to move into a slightly more important point, because if one thinks about it, that program is developed by the teacher, not by the student. And in a sense, the legitimacy for that program and the whole portfolio of programs is the responsibility of a chair. And yet one does see occasionally at those meetings, as it were, the chair and in some sense the teachers withdraw from responsibility of the naked confrontation between the external and the student. And as it were, the student can have, well, why wasn't there this? which never had been part of the programme. Now, in the name, as it were, both of clarity and of fairness, it does seem to me that a greater awareness on the part of external examiners that in some sense, first of all, they're looking at the students' performance in respect to the programme, and of course, hoping that it does more than that and respects a certain general external condition. But a lot of the sort of, when those meetings get occasionally bad-tempered, I think it's usually because it surrounds a kind of confusion of the kind that I've just tried to kind of indicate. So I do think there is something to be done about clarifying that situation, which I think will also, give a greater confidence in the process, both by teachers and certainly by students. Anyway, I mean, I don't know if you...
Just a quick thing. I think this business of separating grading the student and grading the teacher, as it were, where the examiner's letter turns out to be, I mean, certainly you as chair of examiners, you collect insights. You don't get to see everybody. You collect insights from the other examiners, and they go into a kind of letter, and I don't know whether they still do it this way, that usually tries to include comments about each studio. And it's at that point that the studio is flagged as a worry for one reason or another. I think you're together so long. I mean, your year is very long. Your year is another term longer than our year. There's a certain sense you're in it all together, and the students and teachers, certainly by December, should realize that a unit is either, slightly lost or going somewhere. And yes, there is an element of teaching in student, but there's also a kind of collaborative responsibility there that, you get to say to the, you choose the teacher hoping the teacher isn't, just navel gazing and saying, I have this fantastic fantasy about a column in the Agora, and we're going to do that for the year. You choose and there's a certain amount of attrition on units that just don't get any votes. And that's always a real worry for the chairman, that particular moment. There's then, at the examining, what Mark said, I haven't run across a chair who set me up as the hatchet man for a unit. What I generally find is that people back each other, and that's what I would hope to see, i.e. the student is not the victim of some kind of trick like that. If there is an issue, it's usually known well enough in advance, the teacher usually knows it, and it can be discussed maturely, and it's either something rescuable, an accident, or it really needs thinking about. And everybody knows these things are hard. It's not like the teachers come in here and say, oh, fantastic, a paycheck, and waste your time. I mean, you may think they do sometimes, I don't know. But I think the thing I worry about, there's a lot of, the ARB, for example, has set up its grading as a defense against everything going wrong. And it's all training as a result. And I think the examining should set its standards by what works and make sure that nobody's being treated unfairly. A student hasn't been left hung or something like that. Rather than try to, it's a human institution like any other. In architecture, it's not something you can grade by taking its temperature or weighing it. It's a problem of judgment, and it will be for the rest of your lives. And I've seen people work on schemes for 3 years, and then they get a new planning officer who can't take buildings over 5 stories, and that's it. It really can be unfair. But I think in the main, it's vague, but it's fair. People realize the scope, and sometimes we're not, we're not able to realize the issue till we've left the intensity of examining and have had a chance to reflect on it later. So it turns up, something new turns up in the examining letter rather than at the time. But I think on the whole, my experience with the examiners and working with the people, yes, these debates do come up. I can remember people, I failed a student and the teacher simply didn't understand why, and finally the other teachers chipped in and confirmed that he was isolated, But that's very rare, that happened once in 20 odd years. Sorry, I'll stop. I think I'm going on to...
Is something which has always puzzled me, and it has puzzled me as a student at the RIAI a long time ago, and it has also puzzled me as a unit master less long ago, which is that surreal assessment, as far as I was concerned, was really taking place at the review table. In other words, inside the airless pyramid. And I wouldn't say that either as a student or as a teacher, I was not feeling tense at the time of the external examiner's visit, but nevertheless, I felt that the work had already been done, and that the probability of the students failing was very, very little, perhaps even 1 of the 8, which Peter has seen. And so that raised indeed the question about what the role of the examiners is, if that were the case, that the judgment has already been made, and whether then the external examiners are, say, people who say interesting and valuable things as, say, a reviewer might in the press or in some other ways, but I had never actually approached, except possibly at a level of very basic anxiety, but the meeting with the external examiners as an exam. It never came to me in this way. I think at the best it came to me as a useful, interesting dialogue, but never as a judgment.
I think what Mark raised first, what are the external examiners examining, is what you're asking. And in some schools, that's very formally declared, and everybody knows in advance, and they try to send you to school to learn this. So you go through their document. In some schools, you just moderate grades. I mean, what we get presented with is the history of the student and the grade they've received for the various parts. And basically, it's a case of either agreeing that, and this is one of the reasons why pass-fail is so good. I mean, in schools where, you're dealing with 5 increment divisions, that can be really time-consuming, a waste of time. But I think it's also a case for the school to see, it's one of the few times where the school sees itself as itself and gets to present itself objectively. You collectively present yourselves to us. And I think that that doesn't, I don't think that happens in the review table so much as you regard I think just as Mark said, the question of an external examiner who's friendly, who can, with whom you can have, or not. I mean, I often learn more from people who disagree with me than people who agree with me. But I think the review table is even more sensitive at that level. I mean, because that really is where the student finds out that, 20K is going down the tubes or not. Sorry, I keep talking too much, John.
No, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question you're asking, because I remember the first couple of times that I was involved in assessing portfolios where the student didn't pass, where the portfolio was returned as a fail. I don't mean incomplete, I mean where the work was a fail. I remember how problematic that was, because people had already decided that it was a sort of a presentation rather than an examination, if you know what I mean. I think sometimes unit masters, by the time they have got their students through all of the elaborate gravel washing process that the tables represent, feel that the work has been done, and sometimes maybe they find external examiners a bit presumptuous to come in and actually deliver a result which is negative. But if the examiner has no role in that regard, then it kind of demoralizes the process of the exam, I think. But since the failures are so few, although I think when they happen, they have a huge effect on morale for sure. But since they are so few, it really is interesting the extent to which the examination is taken seriously here. I mean, days and days are spent, and people stay late after the exam to discuss general outcomes, way beyond the alphabetical name call of students with pass distinction attached to them. So I have always felt that the school kind of itself welcomed the process of the external examiners. I suppose the school invites the examiners. The examiners are not like a visiting board who are nominated from outside and who come in stalking the building. You know, I suppose the school cooks the books by inviting its own reviewers in. Maybe that generates a certain kind of atmosphere.
But that's general examining. I think that's.
But I would say that's true in every institution.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that you protect the system you have here, which is that somebody either makes the grade or they don't. I think it's really foul, the expectation that other institutions have that examiners are involved in level grading, you know, in percentage marking, which I think is presumptuous. So in that regard, I think there's a lot of it right. It's always been really interesting to me, the tense but intense moment around external examining in the AA, because as you say, it's almost, you know, on paper it's almost unnecessary, but yet it seems to, you know, create its own birth pangs.
If you wanted to use it more, you could prepare the examiners better. I mean, we show up and get it, you know, the night before. You know, I'm going to see 3 or 4 units in intermediate, and then the following day 3 or 4 units in diploma. And I find out at the last minute who I'm going to see. And so I scamper through all the prospectus, and I scamper through what information I have to sort of have some sense of where the hell I'm going to be tomorrow. And, you know, there's a limit to how much time people can devote, you know, when they're flying in from Las Vegas or wherever else. But at the same time, there is a case of, you know, you can make more use of it than you do. Where
No, I must say I would not want to be prepared. I would not want to be prepared. I mean, teaching where I teach and examining where I have examined in other places, there's too much past to the examiner to examine or to get interested in. Too many papers to be read, too many portfolios
this
to
is
be
definitely
weighed,
true. I know
too
this,
much stuff to double check and forms to fill. What I like attached to the word examiner is external examiner, if you know what I mean. You just walk in from outside, you're shown into a room, somebody shows you something, you don't know what it is, and you're asked to make an assessment of it, and that is all you do. And either they ask you back or they don't ask you back, but you're just asked to make a call. You're an external examiner.
But surely the
I
problem...
think they should be banned from the building during the year.
Surely the problem with that, you know, if you have external examiners who, in your sense, are kind of unprepared, when they look at the work of a unit, it must be very difficult for them to I mean, in, as it were, coming to certain negative judgments, let's say, it's very difficult for them to come to a view whether their negative judgment belongs to the, as it were, to the program or to the student's performance in respect to the program.
Yes,
and I think that is a kind of real problem.
But the tendency, I mean, the tendency in institutions is to try to internalize everything. So even the external examiners get internalized. I think it's better to keep an idea that they're putting a fresh eye on something. You have to trust that you ask the people who can do that.
I think the kind of thing I mean by preparation is you usually have your catalog pages done by then, and that's one place. I mean, the AA is generally pretty good at presentation.
Well, the exhibition has to be up.
Yeah, but that's really useful. You get a succinct statement, what the direction, and some samples of what was done. Yeah. So when you come in, you have some idea of what world you're in.
Yeah. And
so the first student you see isn't introducing you to the world that you've been in for 36 weeks or whatever it is. There's also an interesting aspect of this when thinking about presentation is that the units that have kind of been obsessive are much more easier, about one theme, are much easier to present than the themes that have taken on very rich and difficult issues, where things are much more ambiguous and the students had more choice. And the tendency is to be, because it's so quick, the student has about 20, 30 minutes per portfolio, and you've got to get in it and understand where they've gone and why, and move on to the next one. That the stuff that's easy to digest comes off easy to digest. And the stuff that's more complex needs to be presented very well in order so that the examiner can say, right, there's a series of conflicts and this is the issue, and some students are set, so there are ways of doing that. Sorry.
Brian.
With regard to distinguishing the performance of the students and...
Sorry, could you speak up a bit? Sorry, or use the...
Here.
Yeah, no, he's only...
This is with regard to distinguishing the performance of the student from that of the program or the unit. Did I understand you to say or to hint that more could be done in relation to putting forward the history of the student and his or her path and curriculum through the years of the school? And I'm saying this also in relation to the general studies program.
No, we get that. As you know, the sheets, are by student, and you see their track, and you see what, and it's always of interest to us. Who's gone through whose unit. Has this person stayed with the computers, or has this person, stayed in the workshop, or quite what has this person done, and so forth. I think what I was saying was that what we don't, because we don't have time, somebody separate in the examining has to be set aside to look at the written stuff. But if you were the person that's chosen to do that, you don't get to see portfolios. So it's very difficult to sort of put together what students are doing, and you sort of come away with a vague sense of these are the programs that are on offer, and these are some of the performances. Because you get top, middle, and bottom of the written stuff. You can't afford to go through everybody's GS presentation. So the people teaching it. That's become a really that's one of the real transformations since I began, is that GS program and the quality of the stuff that's come out of it. And so examining it has been worthwhile in a very and it's part of what the school does and how it presents itself. And that's so it is worth examining and getting some sort of comment on.
Question there.
Just from a more general perspective, and a perspective.
Sorry, I think we can't.
From a more general perspective of the AA, and a perspective of a new student to the AA, this thing about trust that which you brought up is really key, because where we'd studied before, we perhaps didn't really have that, and it was somewhere where there wasn't a pass or fail, it was all graded, and you got to the point where it kind of felt like you were trying your hardest to do best by kind of fooling the examiners or by jumping through certain hoops, and that kind of crippled the students, and that we didn't really feel that you could get on with what you wanted to do, and then you ended up not knowing what it was that you wanted to do, and you didn't really have much faith in what you were doing anyway, to the point that, particularly by the third year, students would pick studios that they thought would be a safe bet so that they would pass. But then also what happened at the end of the year is that you would be giving some kind of support or grades or whatever from your studio masters, and then they would be often very different to what the external examiners would say, and you'd have no faith in that either. And then you kind of felt, well, there were so many different authorities going on, it's kind of like, well, did the studio fail, or did we just not get it, or did the external examiners not get it? And the school was saying the external examiners were unfair about what they had done and all this kind of stuff, and you kind of felt, well, that was another year wasted because you hadn't really travelled very far. So just from the perspective of someone new to the AA, it's that the appealing thing about the school is that it has that pass and fail, and is that you can kind of, that it has, each student and each unit has an authority to be doing what it's doing. Now, yeah, the discussion as to whether that's a tomb or whether that's, a bus journey in the
I think
city.
that's very important. In fact, I think it's important that the external examiners are not involved in who gets a distinction here at the AA, or who gets the gold star, or whatever it is the AA decides to give to its top students. I think that's, the external examiner is not actually in a fit position to do that.
Yeah.
So, but I was responding just to the question about whether an external examiner can fail a student or not, because if an external examiner is not able to fail a student, then the whole game is over. You know what I mean? But so an exam, somehow it has to yet be an exam. But I don't think it has to be. It doesn't. What I like about the way this organisation works, as much as I understand it, is that the examiner is asked to come in from outside, make an assessment, which sometimes involves, the destiny of individual students, but not to intrude to the level of ranking and ordering and rating the work comparatively. I think some unit masters are ill prepared for the possibility that a student might fail, probably because the pre-assessment procedure is so demanding, and so maybe the unit masters are very concerned to put a good show on the wall, and to get the ethos of the unit across to the examiner. But the examiner has an outside function, and that function, I think, is central.
I mean, everyone's made the point that very few students kind of fail.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I think it might kind of repay a moment or two kind of thinking about the category of failure. Because I have a sense that it's a kind of status at the AA that remains a bit confused from the point of view of the kind of student. Obviously, a student is going to be extremely distressed, kind of, if they fail. And, one would expect normally, I think, that at least the path that they're kind of shown before them, is very clear. Now, for most places, as an academic rather than as an administrative policy, it would include saying to the student that they had some right of resubmission, without having to re-enroll in the school. I mean, let's not consider everything about public sector universities kind of wrong. Most kind of failures would involve, as it were, that you could resubmit the following year without necessarily having to be enrolled as a student. Now, whether or not that was kind of accepted in the AA is not my point. My point is that ought, in some sense, to be an academic issue rather than what you might call an administrative issue. And I think that, in turn, raises another interesting question, which is really who should organise, in a sense, the final examination process. I mean, in a sense, it's always fallen to the chair, together with the registry, to do it. But it's perfectly open, I think, this year to ask the question, given the kind of eloquent terms in which you've put up, the basic sanity of our kind of system, but would it be helped by, in some sense, the tutors, say, of diploma or of intermediate, taking a more active role in setting up the process of the examination, taking responsibility for it, and possibly even appointing the external examiners? It's a question.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are tutors here who might know. I always thought tutors found it rather... I don't know if this is a kind of exquisite enjoyment that the tutors took in the examination process, but in a way it was something that was happening to the tutors rather than something that was organised by the tutors. Is that not part of the cake of it?
No? I don't think that's true. I think there is a communication between the chairman and tutors about who were selected to come and look at the school and at the work, and that's a kind of common decision.
The tutors are not on some sort of committee. The tutors also stand back.
We don't have many committees here, but certainly the chairman takes soundings as to kind of from people as to who should be external examiners. That's my understanding of it anyway. between that, there's this kind of thing called Part 1 and Part 2. Now, in the old days, people would be put forward for Part 2, but not for the diploma, because the diploma has always been considered by the AA to have far more distinction than Part 1 and Part 2. Okay, I'm being slightly provocative now in setting up. What has happened through...
What you're suggesting is it's much easier to get Part 2 than it is to get the AA diploma.
It used to be in the old days, in the proper days, as it were. This school, you talked about this school being experimental, non-professional, whatever that means. This relationship between theoretical practice and material practice, which it seems to me what you guys are kind of making some balance and judgment about, is quite interesting, because more and more it seems to me that architecture is a speculation, philosophical speculation, a cultural speculation, an imaginative speculation, and that buildings perhaps are a happy coincidence of architectural speculation. And this is, in the 21st century, it seems to me that that's what architecture is becoming more and more about. And that relationship between your role and what you're doing, I happen to kind of, I like buildings, but I think I prefer architecture to buildings, if I have to make a choice. What are you judging, as it were? What are you examining?
Could I make a comment? This is working. Just to give a perspective on what external examiners do, and to try and explain that it's a very odd institution that only really exists in the UK. It doesn't exist in other countries. They often find it difficult to understand. The AA didn't have to be involved with external examiners, but decided to be when the RIAI were, they said it was very important that there were external examiners' reports to back up the review of the work that a visiting board might make. And when the AA used to be central to the mainstream of architectural education in this country, it was very closely connected to business and practice in all sorts of ways, and really led educational development. It was kind of obvious it would be connected to the RIAI system, although the AA always thought it was rather superior to the RIAI. It was one of the consequences then of that connection that the AA needed to have external examiners. As regards what external examiners do, they operate broadly in universities in this country, and there's been endless questioning about why they're needed. And about 10 years ago, there was discussion about perhaps dropping them altogether, because if assessment arrangements were fair enough in universities and courses, and the internal arrangements were thorough, why do you need people to come and look at everything? The situation has changed now, so that there is a real valuing of the external examiners, and they're seen as part of, I hate the word, a quality assurance process. They're a means of giving external credibility to what is going on in an institution. And the primary briefing for an external examiner elsewhere, which the AA half accepts and half doesn't accept, is that the external examiners are not involved in the assessment of the students' work. Their role is to ensure that the school is being fair to its students and that appropriate standards are being in the program. So that's this kind of bottom line role. And what is a hopeless situation with examining is to sit down with people in the school, with the students' work, and for the school itself to not make up its mind what it thinks about that work. Now, if it does say that it's made up its mind and it wishes to propose that work is good work and it should pass, it's still possible for an external examiner to object to that and wish to moderate, again, another horrible word, as John has said. And that's the acid test of the process. And it tends to be a lot to do with discussions about bottom line standards. Now, in the current situation, which the AA may choose to want to be part of or not to be part of it, there is a kind of hiatus developing in architectural education more widely, because the two organisations externally, the RIAI and the Architecture Registration Board, have different views really about what any process might be for. The Registration Board is just concerned to register people as architects. They only register as architects, and it's concerned with bottom line competence, capability of people, that they can be publicly responsible in what they do as architects. It's nothing to do with architectural quality or merit or raising bench. The but the registration board has, over the last year, moved to put pressure on people who are external examiners and universities to require them to say that the registration board requirements are satisfied by the students they're looking at. In fact, they'd quite like the examiners to say for each student that they're satisfied, because in the end they register students as individuals. That's quite a different role from the RIAI's role, which is tended to look at courses overall, and it's again being concerned with bottom line capability that you're recognised or not recognised as a school, but it's much more interested in achievement beyond that, and the RIAI has within its charter the positive encouragement of innovation and the real exploration of the subject. Anyway, it's definitely a difficult situation at the moment, and however much the RIAI and the registration board fight, it's probably difficult for the AA to be completely above it and pay no account of any of this. Because in the end, I think the AA has decided that it's worth being a recognised school because it's in the students' interest in the end. It gives them a kind of leverage to do other things. And there might be some of them that want to become registered architects in this country. So it treads a kind of path between being in the system but wanting to be out of it, I think.
I think it's particularly important for your overseas students, is it not? Where the RIBA recognition is the qualification to practice in a lot of countries? Or the equivalent?
That's often argued.
It certainly wasn't for me. When I joined as a student here, there were no equivalence between France and England.
No, I'm not speaking about France, really. I mean, there's a...
Sure.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago. But the
France is
situation
as autonomous as the AA.
Sorry?
France is as autonomous as the AA.
No, but I was about to have a degree, which would be worthless in France, where I was expecting to practice. And I suppose many people who actually come and join the school these days must be joining the school with a similar degree of uncertainty as to the value of their degree when they come back. And in fact, Paul Finch made a very provocative suggestion in his presentation on Monday night, where Paul was saying, well, perhaps, one scenario for the AA is that the AA is a global school, and therefore any kind of local assessments, whether they are the ARV or God knows what, might not be so relevant. It was not something which he thought, it was a question which he raised. And certainly when one joins an institution in this frame of mind, when one comes to study architecture rather than come to obtain a degree, it puts you in a very particular state of mind, which I think is highly desirable.
I think there's nothing to add about that, which is the dilemma between the American system, the main European system, and the British system, which is gradually coming closer to the European system now. But for instance, you can study in France, you can do a Part 1 and a Part 2 program, bring your qualification to this country, and become a registered architect. If in this country you want to be a registered architect, you've got to do a third program, a Part 3 program. So that's a problem with it. In America, the issue is there's a clear separation between the academic program and then the professional examination you do afterwards. So you can say they're separate worlds.
Yeah, they're not connected at all. They're not connected at all, although the schools are reviewed.
But the AA, because it's presumed you're preparing people who can, many of them function as professionals, needs to keep a kind of position so that students can, go in different directions.
I mean, the system that's really seamless is Switzerland, where your teachers at the ETH are also the people who are judging all the competitions that you enter, and they're all graded according to the scale of examination, scale of competition. The teachers are slotted into different levels, and you find yourself pursuing your teachers for life until you become one.
I mean, I think, sorry, there's a point there.
I just wanted to make a point about coming from another country and having Part 1 and 2 and becoming a registered architect. And that is that you don't necessarily get to be a registered architect in the UK because you have Part 1 and 2 exempted. You need to actually get Part 3, UK Part 3, before you become a registered architect. You can't just come and
No,
get
I know, but
exempted.
it's only a matter of time before there's an appeal in the European courts about it, because it's practically unfair to British students. So Part 3 could disappear for that reason.
I hope not, because I'm out of a job then.
It's a live issue.
There is one very obvious issue which we haven't kind of addressed when we're talking about assessment and external examining, which is that an increasing proportion of the school are assessed and examined actually under the validation of an external body, the Open University. And, you know, I mean, I don't know if we want to kind of open that whole question up, but it's very important in thinking of the school as a whole. And we have kind of tried to kind of react to the increasing kind of demands on us by the OU. Well, we had an external examiner in Peter. We tended to do it normally through sort of criminal transgression and a sort of massive forgery. You know, because we would obviously have wanted there a kind of simple kind of system, but as it were, you're pretty much directed towards one of these awful kind of, you know, is it 54 or 55? Or, you know, if one says 54, the other one says 55, should we send it to the external examiner? No, just call it, you know, 54. I mean, and in a sense, how the AA deals in the long term at the level of the graduate school with a process of sort of having to obey their examination rules, but, you know, they're increasingly kind of burdensome. When we started off being validated by the OU, they had a kind of party of half-civilized people who said, of course, we will continue to respect the independence and traditions of the AA. You know, now, recently, we even had to go up to Milton Keynes, for God's sake, for a meeting. Absolutely. You know, when you get there, you can't understand what they're saying, let alone whether you obey it or disobey it. It's all this kind of validation talk, you know, which has become a sort of bizarre babble in itself. No one, you know, no one could bear to kind of listen to it. So, I mean, what we do there, I mean, is, I think, a problem, especially if that becomes more detailed and more burdensome. Peter, what would you...
No, the validation babble has a real disease, and this government has a lot to answer for. I mean, they do it in the hospitals, they do it in this, and it's an absolute bloody nightmare. It generates infinite paperwork, pseudo-categories. You find yourself addressing, you know, it's like epicycles. You find yourself addressing tertiary problems as if they were primary and missing the main point. And, you know, it's very difficult to get it. I mean, it's become very qualification conscious. And, you know, in America, students know that they're paying a lot. And they go to courses. The first day, they go to all the courses that they're interested in. And if they don't like the course, they just don't go. And, you know, it's very upfront in that way. And England has tried to do this because England has, you're probably aware of this debate, England's attitude to universities is that everybody should go. Everybody should be able to go. The kind of fees you pay here or the kind of fees that an American pays to go to that university is what we're trying to teach students at Cambridge for about 1/10 of what you're paying here. And that's one of the reasons we'll probably...
No, you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, you get... Sorry. You're not living on fee income.
Well, the way we get the other income we get, I mean, I don't want to get lost in this. The other income we get is through research income. And that's why the research has become so prominent. It's a necessity of survival. I mean, sorry, I don't want to get all lost in this. So much as that the whole problem of money has gotten keyed to the problem of qualification, and the students have become very anxious about being qualified, whereas I grew up in a regime where why to be in architecture is because it was a really terrific subject. That was where all the interesting people were. You know, they ranged from mathematicians to poets to builders, you know, and you got to move around, you know, it just wasn't a specialization. And it's becoming a real rarity in the university. Cambridge doesn't understand how to support architecture. They get all bothered by it being professional, which I can understand, you know, that they don't understand. They'd say, right, okay, so here's the academic criteria and here are the professional criteria. In order to fulfill the professional criteria, you've got X thousands you've got to pay to make sure the students are trained, they've got to get through the blah. They don't understand, you know, it's neither the quadrivium nor the trivium. It seems to sit in between as a kind of anomaly. Oxford doesn't have one. Oxford Brookes is there, but it isn't part of Oxford. And the business of trying to turn everything into a qualifiable subject is something that the government has gotten involved with, and that's why validation babble comes up in all sorts of areas. It's a problem, and I mean, this is you. I don't know if you realize how rare an institution you are.
I mean, it has been said, I mean, that here what we have is a fail and a pass. I'm wondering even whether we have a fail. Fail in science is used extremely rarely, and from my experience, it is mostly used for tactical reasons, to actually send a message. And see...
Maybe at table level, but certainly not at our level.
No, not precisely. Yes, I was going to come to that. Not at the external examiners level. And I think, as has been said, I think this is really important. But the fact that the fail is almost never used inside the school. In other words, the choice appears to be either pass or to be in limbo. And it creates a very particular atmosphere in the school, and one which can in some ways be extremely painful to the students, but one which, on the other hand, I mean, painful partly because of the subjectivity which is involved, and therefore, just like as in limbo, the students feeling potentially rather lost. But nevertheless, I think what is quite remarkable in this situation is that one is really talking about education rather than assessing the work according to a pre-existing set of standards. And I think this is really the thing which is marvelous about the school, from my point of view.
But I mean,
Well,
I think
that's what I came here to say. I mean, I think that is what is so special, and I think that is what you need to maintain. And I think that I don't know if in the middle of all this reconsideration that independence or that separateness is at risk, but I think that's the thing you must jealously guard.
I think, I mean, to support Irene, I mean, there is that kind of extraordinary AA kind of category. It's either pass or complete to pass.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, that seems a kind of a generous way of dealing with the situation, although I do remember once kind of seeing this kind of sentence by the Quattrocento Pope Pius II, who suddenly kind of changed traditional Catholic teaching and said, God does not require the death of a sinner, but rather that he should live and pay. It sort of seemed appropriate at the AA.
There is one kind of failure, though, surely, which is the failure of units and unit masters who don't get reappointed. And if I'm hearing that actually failing students and, or even passing severe judgments on individual students is rare among at the level of the external examination, then I'm led to suppose that the bulk of the examination is really examining the program and the units. And insofar as conclusions are being drawn as to whether people succeed in going forward with the units or not, it is surely a kind of judgment that is being invited upon units and unit masters. And if that is the case, then for whom is this information? Is it for the chairman? Because normally the chairman, I suppose, is the person who decides who will run units.
I think, I mean, just personally speaking, I think there's an internal conversation with the chair, an internal conversation with the unit, and then there's the formulation in the examiner's letter that is really aimed at other people, that, you know, speaks of concern or something like this. But on the whole, most of the attrition at that level has taken place at the selection time. It's I've never run across a malicious or completely incompetent unit. They may have tried something that was too much of a gamble, or they may have taught it vaguely, or they may have gotten hit by SARS or whatever else. But in the main, it's more adjustment rather than the Jim Sterling. Would I just see the contents of a Hoover bag? I want to see buildings. I believe in solidity and the nobility of culture and all of that.
I think that would be a sinister manipulation of the role of the external examiner if the external examiner was in some kind of employment consultancy, in relation relation to the chairman's choice. Whatever person you get to be the chair, I
Mm.
hope that they would not even think of going down that street. I don't think it's got anything to do with it. That's an internal matter, not an external matter. Who the school employs and whose contracts they renew.
There's a question, and then I think we're very close. We're going to have to.
It's just an observation about the potential of the external examiner at this critical moment in a student's life. Because they are actually the hinge point. And we talked about what's in the portfolio and whether or not the student is present. But if the student is present, and that's the ideal situation,
Yeah.
the first thing the external examiner can do is recognise immediately the integrity of the portfolio. I mean, that is something that I think does show actually the body of the work.
Mm.
And the second thing is that, given that the student is hopefully going to transfer from being a student to being connected to this external world that the external examiner comes from, a few penetrating questions to the student can actually very, very quickly assess whether they're engaged with their own work. In other words, is it their work? Is there authenticity of their own work? Or is it primarily driven by the unit stuff?
Or did they just share the software?
Right?
Or did they just share the software? Sorry.
Well, that's a very good point, because actually...
No,
yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've said what I'm saying. I mean, I just think that you can also possibly find things out that within the unit situation have perhaps not been able to be found out, perhaps because of a prejudiced view of a teacher in relation to student. Because they may be very difficult to teach, or et cetera, et cetera. But they may have some critical engagement which stand in very good stead in the external world.
Maybe this would be the last question.
Yes, hi. I'm Emma in 5th year. And maybe just to leave something that I think, if there is anything that the school should think about in terms of examination now for this year and next year and the future, is just what these words mean to the students. Because I think, for me, the beauty of pass-fail is that you don't treat it as an evaluation of your work, and therefore you must look elsewhere for the evaluation, which then becomes the juries, it becomes your tutorials. It's a year-long evaluation. The judgment is not in a number. There is nothing there. It's so empty almost that, yes, there are so many other things that you look for feedback for your work. So even just the way that we use these words like examination or evaluation or assessment, they're very particular. And I think it's important that the students kind of collectively have an awareness of the status of these words in this environment. And so also things like, even if you look at the difference between external examiners, which come at the end of the year, if they're treated like, or the RIAI, we have to make the school pretty for these things, or we have to show our work. At least it's an attitude. I'm not saying whether I agree with it or not, but it's an attitude. And it makes it very clear that you're not looking there to be valued in those moments. There's something other. It's like, because there are no numbers, you can't cram for these things. It's not like other processes. So it brings a different awareness to the students and how they do the work over the entire year. And on the level of, whether it's for the staff or for the students, I think an interesting other point of, let's say, external evaluation is the open jury, which happens kind of in the middle of the year, which I don't know how it used to be. I've only seen it over these 5 to 6 years. But there are always kind of interesting things that come out, like, is this for the students or is it for the units, like the unit masters, or the staff or the chairman, to see, where are we in relation to maybe other schools, other models of education, other thoughts. And often it's not at that moment about the individual student's work. And so, those are interesting points to think about. Where does external participation in what the school is doing come in? And I like the idea of, how do we use these occasions? And but I think that's important just because also we've had now this introduction and more of an emphasis on technical studies, maybe to do with requirements for RIBA or whatever. Also things like future practice, which is coming, or even in the third year, there's a sort of future practice program, which I think falls from the discussion that was earlier this week on internationalism and localism. But what is given to the students and the attitude of the
Would you both briefly like to sort of give a final comment?
I don't know. I don't know the. I'm sure the AA has a lot to concern itself with, and this new appointment will be very important to the school because, as what Chris Cross was outlining, there's a whole lot of that coming or present or burgeoning or something, and I think it's important. I somehow feel at an international level or at the level of the culture of architecture, I think it's somehow important that the AA manages to survive again or renew itself again or something. But coming here today, when Belinda and Mark asked me to come here, it just seemed to me that wherever the crisis lies, it probably isn't in the area of assessment or examination here. I think that it is scrupulous, it is fair, and it is probably a model that other places might follow. So you probably have a lot to get sorted, but maybe not that's not the topic of this lunchtime seminar, of what you have to get sorted.
John took the words out of my mouth and said them better.
Okay, I thought the last contribution, in a sense, really did actually push it a kind of stage further, because in a sense, the logic of your position, and it's to take up kind of Irene's point about really, why does one use the term fail? What you're really saying is, as it were, they're external accreditors. That is to say, they come and they give to those who earn it, they get the diploma. Perhaps we should think then, that it's not helpful to say people failed, they just didn't get it. Now, it's not because, as it were, one thinks that one can transform reality just at the level of words. But in a sense, that does actually clarify, I think, the kind of true character of the AA's form. That it really points out the utter difference between that and where you say, is this a borderline 2-1 or not? Which is a truly pointless activity.
A guaranteed pass is equally useless.
That's different. Well, that's like, it's like saying life's meaningless. Okay, well, in full recognition of the pointlessness of existence, kind of ends our Thank you. And there will be a talk at 6:30. Sorry? 6:30.